Morning, Tim.
Morning.
How's it going?
Good. I haven't talked to you in a while.
Indeed.
Geez, Tim knows everybody.
Of course.
It's because I have a new job every 6 months.
Oh, okay.
It's more like everybody knows Tim.
Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. This episode is sponsored by Component One, makers of Widgmo. If you need stunning UI elements or awesome graphs and charts, then go to widgmo.com and check them out. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 23 of the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have Tim Caswell.
Hello.
We also have Joe Eames.
Howdy.
And I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. We also have a special guest, and that's Ariya Hidayat. Is that how you say it?
Yes, that's me. Hi, everyone.
Do you want to introduce yourself for us, since you haven't been on the show before?
So, my name is Ariya. I work at Sencha, and I also create some open source project, and one of them is Phantom.js.
Awesome. So, do you want to explain a little bit about what Phantom.js is for the people that aren't familiar with it?
Sure. So Phantom.js is essentially an implementation of Webkit, but it's sort of headless, which means nothing goes to the screen. So you drive it completely from the command line. And it has an API that you can control through either JavaScript or CoffeeScript. So one of the typical examples is you create a web page, and then you load a certain URL, and then you render it as an image. And you can do that with 6 lines of code, and write in a script and then run it with Phantom.js.
Awesome. So what goes into building something like this? I know Webkit is open source.
Mm-hmm. There are several components that is being used by Phantom.js. First, Webkit itself is like the name says, it's a kit. So it has all this abstraction about network stack, graphic stack, and then everything else. What I use for Phantom.js is something called the Qt WebKit. It's obviously called Qt. This is the application framework from Nokia. And the reason I use that is because I'm biased. In the past, I used to work for Nokia/Trolltech. So I know that framework a little bit. And one of the nice things about Qt WebKit is we can totally run it in a headless mode, because it has this some sort of window abstraction implementation where everything goes to the memory buffer instead of to the actual screen on your monitor. So that's why I choose that. So most of the code inside Webkit itself is pretty much platform independent, and we just have a specific implementation for, say, network stack. Because the way you do networks request and response on Linux is certainly different than Windows, and slightly different as well on Mac. So that's one of the example where the implementation differs for every platform.
That's interesting. So before we get into how people are using this, maybe to test their applications, are people using it for things other than testing? Most
of the use case is about testing. There are cases where people want to use Phantom.js to get information of websites or web pages, to be more precise, because it handles JavaScript, right? So if you create a completely Ajax-based apps, then you just can't use a simple HTTP client such as curl, because then it won't get all the dynamic stuff which is executed by JavaScript. Or you really can't use an emulation implementation like JS DOM, because that is not a real rendering engine, right? It's emulated to a certain extent, but in some cases it may fail.
Right. So AJ just joined the call. Just give him a chance to say hello.
Hello.
All right. So with testing, you can use this with Jasmine or with QUnit. Did you design it with one of those in mind, or did you just put it out there so that people could pick it up and implement it in their test suites?
So those two runners are just the examples. Apparently, as I'm aware right now, almost every JavaScript testing frameworks has some sort of support for Phantom.js, either officially or not. So the way it happens is because basically you pretend there's a browser. So if you create a test framework, usually there's a URL or a script file that you load in a browser, and then it tells you everything about how the script runs, and you just implement that in Phantom.js very easily, because you just instantiate the web page and then go to that URL, and then you just sort of try to figure out the outcome of the testing. So the last part is usually the slightly more difficult part, because every test framework has different ways to report the result of the test.
Right.
So sometimes it's a matter of figuring out the selector that's being used to display the text, and then you extract it and then get the inner text or inner HTML out of the elements.
So you basically have an access to the JavaScript context directly.
Yes and no, because you need to sort of evaluate a string in the web page context.
Okay,
you can totally pass an argument or get the result and then go back to the main context.
That's cool.
It's done that way because of security, because then any web page will never ever know that it's actually running inside Phantom.js.
Right, that's a good idea. One use case that I had, the company I worked at before I was at Sencha, we were constantly needing to make screenshots of web pages. Can you get access to the frame buffer as well?
Yes, yes. You can capture the web page. You can even specify the zoom factor or the clip regions, and you can save it as a file or produce the base64 version of the image. And some websites actually use this as a way to generate automatic screenshots. For example, media queries use Phantom.js because basically the goal of the site is to capture your web page in different screen resolution, right? So something that is small, which resembles the probably mobile web browser, and something that's quite big for the desktop. So it will show you how your page behaves. If you have a responsive design, obviously things looks okay. Otherwise, things can get really mess up there.
So that's interesting. With responsive design, is there a way to set the resolution or the resolution that it perceives that it has?
Yes, you can play with different viewport, and of course when you capture the entire page, you can choose to capture the whole page as opposed to the visible window. So if you have a web browser, this is different between the view that you see in the window and the entire web page itself. So if your page is extremely long and you see it on a mobile browser, what you see is only a portion of the page. So you can choose to capture either that only or the entire page.
Does it also output vector format or just the bitmap in the frame buffer?
The supported vectors format is PDF.
Okay, so you can make a PDF from a web page as well.
Yes.
That's cool.
There's a commercial service like URL to PNG, and the way it works is basically the same. So you can totally build a screenshot web page, screenshot surface using Phantom.js. In fact, there are at least 4 examples of doing that with many different frameworks from Node.js to Play framework. Because you need some sort of front-end code that drives Phantom to load the page and then create the screenshots, as well as some bookkeeping stuff in case the page loads forever or it doesn't work.
Cool. So you started this when you were at Sencha, right?
I started a long time ago when I was with Nokia. And
before that, okay.
Yes, one of the reasons, but I never get the time to clean up and publish it. So one of the use case I had in mind was back when I was still very active working on Webkit. I want to test different functionality, but I don't want to create a C++ program that I need to compile every single time and then play with it. So then I just take the important classes like the web page abstraction and then provide an API so that I can control it from my script. And that was the early prototype of Phantom.js.
Okay, so you weren't testing web pages, you were testing Webkit itself.
Yeah, I want to play with different. What if I disable image loading? What if I disable script loading? What happens? And things like that.
Cool.
Oh, interesting. Well, I think we can all appreciate where it's gone from there. So do you have to have a web server up and running in order to test things with Phantom.js?
No, you can work from a file system. And if you disable web security, you can still have XSR access or cross-site access, and that should work well.
Okay.
How much of HTML or HTML5 does it support? I mean, it's basically just latest Qt WebKit.
Pretty much. So it's probably not up to Safari 6 or Chrome 21 yet, but that's something that is in our to-do to, try to catch up with the latest version of WebKit.
So do you find yourself contributing back to Qt WebKit a lot?
These days, not anymore, because we just use whatever gets implemented there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the challenging part is that we don't support, for example, CSS 3D, because that requires implementation of compositing and performance implication of doing compositing in software makes me think that I'd rather not support it than having CSS 3D that performs extremely slow. Because we are completely headless, right? So we don't have the luxury of using, say, OpenGL on Mac or Direct 3D on Windows.
So you can't do off-screen GL to a frame buffer. It has to be to the screen.
Yes, there's a workaround for that. We can use, for example, Mesa, but that's a huge of effort, and then that's not something that I want to undertake right now.
Okay.
Right. So is Phantom.js all written in C++ then, or?
It's written in C++ with some of the, for example, the module system is implemented in JavaScript. So one of the nice features in the next upcoming version is you can use pretty standard CommonJS/Node.js module in your script. So yeah, it gets more and more like Node.js.
So did you have to implement your own JavaScript engine, or using parts and pieces from WebKit and then just bolting on the API that you want?
Right. So WebKit has already a built-in JavaScript engine called JavaScript Core, and we just use that, and then we hook additional API.
That sounds really, really handy.
Indeed. So, as I told you before, this works out because I started as a way to test various bits and pieces of WebKit. So one of the nice thing about Phantom Jas, is that it's really easy to install on Mac and Windows. It's just one executable. You don't need anything else. And on Linux, for the next upcoming version, we will also have the same static build features. So it's almost zero dependency.
So you're just distributing binaries. You're not compiling on the system.
The problem with compiling is because it has thousands of WebKit files. Usually takes 30 minutes, even with 4 parallel jobs. And that's something that not everyone is eager to do.
Okay.
So if I wanted to add headless testing to my Node app that has heavy Ajax, I could just depend on some NPM module that has a binary Phantom in it?
There's already a Phantom node, which basically bridge Node.js script with Phantom Jas, so you can control Phantom Jas from your Node script.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, is there anybody, to go back to an alternate use case, is there anybody you're aware of that's using, it seems like if you ever needed a case where you wanted to capture HTML that was produced and store it for offline use, that Phantom.js would be perfect for that if the HTML is being produced by JavaScript.
So there was a report of somebody doing that, and the reason is because sometimes you want to serve those HTML to search engines, right? Because otherwise the search engine can't really get to know what you display on your website if you're completely Ajax-based.
Right. Yeah, that's always been an issue if you're doing SEO, that you have to have everything you want the SEO bot to see in your static HTML. Otherwise,
exactly.
it didn't happen.
And you don't want to, have 2 different codes for doing that.
Yeah, that's just a hassle to write a bunch of code that nobody's going to see except for this bot.
Exactly.
In fact, I think most of the search engines would probably penalize you for it if they found out that that's what you're doing. Even if the information was accurate, they want to see what the user's going to see.
So how tough is it as WebKit comes out with new versions for you guys to adapt Phantom.js to those newer versions?
It will be not trivial, but I would not call it difficult as well. So the challenge is just, compiling it takes ages. So if I screw up something, then I'll know it in 30 minutes as opposed to just 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
So have you guys updated to, is WebKit revved very much recently? Have you guys had to go through that process?
Excuse me. We plan to do that for the next version, which is, by the way, scheduled for September. So I'm in the process of doing that, and it doesn't seem to be quite difficult. The challenge is, beside long compile time, is also testing, because web technologies is very complicated. Webkit itself has around 20,000 layout tests, and of course, this is accumulated over almost 10 years, so it's huge. And right now, we just don't have enough volunteers to do a lot of corner cases and edge cases testing.
Right. So if somebody wanted to get involved in Phantom.js, what kind of programmer are you looking for?
Well, any type. So if you know C++, then you can definitely help from the implementation sides. If you are web developers, you can help testing it, especially on Windows, because we have a lot of demanding Windows users, but very few people test our Windows binaries, and that's just sometimes not good.
Do you have a test suite around Phantom.js, or do you count on people using it and then reporting bugs?
Both. We have unit tests, but it doesn't really test a lot of stuff. So it's mainly testing the Phantom.js interface or API. Right. Yeah, but if I want to know whether every SVG out there is rendered correctly, that's hard to do.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So one of the problems that I've run into recently with Phantom.js, I was testing using Jasmine and wanted to use the jQuery Jasmine plugin in order to get fixtures in my project. And I was running the page this is on Windows, just off the hard drive, right? And so the security context is different. We were running in Chrome, and as we'd load this HTML page and it'd go out and try to grab the jQuery Jasmine fixtures off the drive, I was getting a cross-site security exception, and I had to go into Chrome and set something specifically in there in order for that to work. I had to go change a setting inside of Chrome, one of Chrome's settings. Well, in Phantom, I couldn't discover any way to make the same change so that the security would work in Phantom, so that when I was running under CI, that it would work. Does that make any sense? And is there a solution for that?
There's the web security command line flags as well as the web page settings. Usually that solves the problem. But there's a general problem with file access where you can't really go to something that is not under your directory. So you can go deep down, but you cannot go up further.
Right.
But so you can totally pull from the network if you enable the, say, web security or something in your subdirectory.
So if I'm trying to solve that problem, is it easier for me if I just organize my files that they're in my partial, my fixtures that they're in subdirectories rather than in sister directories? Siblings?
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know.
So in this case, it seems to me that this kind of handles things from the full view of your web application as opposed to, things like unit tests and stuff.
Yes, that's true. Unit tests can be used with Phantom.js as well. For example, I have this example where I create a git pre-commit hook that launches Phantom.js with my test, and this serves as a quick smoke test so that I know I don't screw up things. And because it's really fast and it doesn't show anything to the screen, it's really not disrupting my workflow. So when I do a git commit, it's just doing something behind my back for 2 seconds, and then if something is wrong, then my commit is completely blocked. So combining fast smoke testing with git pre-commit hook is something that I highly recommend.
Do you have an example of that somewhere in a GitHub gist or something?
I think I show it in some conference, but you're right. I haven't made any blog posts or documentation about that. Okay. I can do that.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Just to see it and maybe be able to steal it instead of try and write it myself.
Right. Another thing is if you use Travis CI, which is pretty cool. It has a built-in Phantom.js, so you can totally run your tests every time you push to the remote origin or your repository. So if you have a GitHub project and you have a web application there, you already have Jasmine or QUnit or whatever, you can use a simple Travis interface to automatically test your application every time you push to your GitHub repo.
Yeah, Travis CI is really cool. It's free for open source projects, and I think they're working on a commercial version. I don't know if they've released it yet, but yeah, they spoke at RailsConf in Austin this year, and their whole
whole infrastructure is really kind of interesting. But yeah, it's cool to know that they have that built in so that you can test things from top to bottom.
Right. Some projects already take advantage of that. For example, Modernizer and Ember.js. So it has some hooks to run Phantom Jas with the unit tests.
Yep.
So you say it's fast, but I mean, you're spinning up a whole WebKit. What is the CPU wait time and the memory use of a Phantom instance?
So I never measure it. So the fast here refers to versus if you are about to emulate everything from DOM, JavaScript, and CSS.
So it's definitely it's faster CPU wise than going through JS DOM, for example.
Yes, and it's more faithful because it's real DOM parser, real DOM implementation, real CSS implementation.
Okay, and if I just had a very simple test that just ran my page and closed, what's the overhead of Phantom? 2 seconds maybe on a modern machine?
Oh, it's way faster than that.
Okay, so it's really, really fast.
Yes.
Awesome.
So conceivably I could add this in with the test suite for my unit test for my front end and my back end, and then, just have this run, alongside it and do all of the integration tests for me.
Right.
And it wouldn't add that much time to my test suite running.
It's very little.
Yeah, I've used it a lot, and I haven't noticed it practically. It seems like it has no overhead. My unit tests take way longer to run. Any difference between the time of this test suite running all by itself? Actually, it's a lot longer to run my test suite in a real live browser than in Phantom.js.
So there's a slight overhead, a couple of 100 milliseconds, but that's because on Windows and Mac we compress the executable with the UPX, which is the self-compressed execution. And just to reduce the size, and that's adds 100 milliseconds, which is pretty much negligible.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the trick why Phantom Jas is very small. So on Windows it's about 7 megabytes, on Mac is 10 megs tops.
How big would it be without that compression?
3 times. So that's why it's really worth doing it.
Wow.
That's why if you do brew install Phantom Jas, you'll be done in less than 5 minutes.
So I've had a couple of situations where when I was putting together my runner page for Jasmine, I had to go and grab the runner page out of your sample. But I know there's tons of unit testing frameworks out there, and they're popping up all the time. And so, I'm sure that these ones are hard to find somebody else that's already written one, or if maybe you need some change. Is it easy to get actual support, send in a support ticket, say, hey, I'm having some trouble getting Phantom.js to run with this particular unit testing framework or under these circumstances, and get some support?
Well, to be honest, I haven't heard of someone requested that yet, so that's probably a good thing.
Well, I know that it took me more than a couple of minutes to get Jasmine hooked up, but a lot of it was finding just the right Jasmine unit runner.
Right. I do realize that we have problem with documentation, mainly because there's not enough people who wants to volunteer to write docs. So one of the items on my already very long to-do list is to write, if you have this new test framework, this is how you create a runner for that, and basically a concept for a runner as opposed to the real runner.
Right. And I just want to point out that there's a fellow out there, I'm trying to remember his name, and I'll probably remember it here in a minute, but he does a lot of talking about mentorship and stuff. Mm-hmm. And one of the good ways of getting in on mentorship, so if you wanted to work with Ariya, one good way of getting in and doing that is what he calls sweeping the dojo, which is you're not qualified to actually, maybe write a ton of code, and you just kind of want to get your foot in the door and get familiar with the project and things. Then things like writing documentation and maintaining the wiki and, helping verify bug reports and things like that aren't the heavy lifting things are also really helpful for project owners like Ariya, and a good way to get involved.
Yeah, that's good to know. We really need that.
Yeah, it's Dave Hoover over at, I think he's at Groupon now.
Is there anybody that's actually on the Phantom.js project watching Stack Overflow questions that are tagged with Phantom.js?
Well, I do that from time to time, and seems that before I try to answer it, somebody usually already answered some of those questions, so that's good.
The beauty of Stack Overflow.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Well, that's the purpose, right?
Yep. Lots of people have the answer. Sometimes they have the wrong one.
Well, what's the great thing about Phantom.js is once you get it hooked up, then you just never have to touch it again. Once you get it configured, then it's just there and it's working and your CI just goes on.
Yeah. So what testing framework do you prefer for JavaScript, Ariya?
For Phantom.js, we use Jasmine. It's just because somebody that implemented the first unit test, he was familiar with Jasmine.
Right.
So the way it works in Phantom.js is very typical, like many other open source projects. If you want to do something, then make it happen, and it's up to you how to make it happen. So it was the first, then it was Jasmine. But I use QUnit as well, and I like it. And Buster.js has been my favorite lately, just because, just like Jest Test Driver and Yeti, you can just connect to web server and then it captures all the web browsers. Works well as well with Phantom.js, obviously.
Nice. So are there any features upcoming in future versions of Phantom.js that you want to talk about?
So the next one is 1.7. It has a modal system and...
Modal system? Meaning?
Yes, common JS, Node.js modal.
Okay.
So you can require something. And... can't remember. There are some features necessary for the implementation of WebDriver. So there's a sister project called Ghost Driver, which is basically a WebDriver implementation using Phantom.js. And it requires some additional features, such as being able to open a window and then access it, and then switch from one frame to another, and that kind of features. And static build for Linux. So hopefully you can have just 10 megabyte executable file that you can drop into your CI box, and hopefully it runs. And finger crossed, we should be able to have a much modern version of Webkit.
Cool.
So another typical thing of Phantom.js is that it has time-based releases. So 4 times a year, which I call seasonal release schedule, because it releases every season. The last one was definitely summer. So the next one will be for fall.
Oh, that's interesting. It seems like a lot of open source projects, they either follow a schedule like that, or they just release, when they have whatever feature set they want finished. Is there a reason you went that way instead of...
So that's something that I have wanted to do for a long time. And when I started Phantom.js, I saw the opportunity to make it happen, and everyone seems to like it.
Nice.
And the code name for the release is always after flowers.
Oh.
So if it's released in summer, then it has a summer flower name.
Interesting.
And here I thought Two Flower was from the movie.
So if you have suggestions for the code name for the next release, then I'll appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll find some foul-smelling flower or something.
It has to be good.
Sago Lily? There's a suggestion.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's a nice name.
Yeah, isn't it the state flower for the state of Utah?
Yeah.
Oh, Fiatsi. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm trying to think of more questions, but I don't know if I have any.
Can I just say that Phantom.js is awesome?
Yes, you can. And
what's really crazy about it is I know that there are there's Buster and Test Driver JS that allow capture for the other browsers, which is a very valuable thing, obviously. But my experience has been that testing in multiple browsers is really not necessary. If I find problems in other browsers with my code, it's really not stuff that is unit test related. It's more typically visual related. I know that there are differences in implementations in the JavaScript engines, but by and large, things that work in Webkit work elsewhere in the other browsers. So it just seems to me like this is such a significantly important piece of bringing test-driven development and unit testing into the JavaScript world that it's, without Phantom.js, we'd be years behind where we're at right now.
Well, to be fair, web developers these days already know how to write more or less cross-browser code, right? So it's different than a few years ago. So that really helps. There's a slightly less chance that you make a browser-specific problems, and therefore, as long as you can test it quickly, then you're good. I always view testing as multiple layers of tests. So you need to have a quick test first, and then you need to have a comprehensive, probably 20 browser coverage tests. And we can see that as we do coding itself, right? The first test is usually test the code even past JSLin or any other linter. So that's some sort of early test, and then you try to execute it, and then does it make sense? Is it valid? And then it goes on and on. So it's really layers of onions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Joe, do you want to explain how you approach using Phantom.js?
Well, so again, like I said before, one of the beautiful things about Phantom.js is once it gets hooked up, it's done. So in every case where I've used Phantom.js, I've used it both with QUnit and with Jasmine. In both cases, it works slick. I did mention the one problem that I had with using Jasmine jQuery. But all I do is I get my tests running in the browser locally. And once my tests are running, I go over to CI. I have to go. Phantom.js has included the two files that are necessary for both QUnit and for Jasmine in order to run. And they have, I think I've gotten the documentation online that basically just says, you're going to want to call Phantom.js, the executable, then the first parameter, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm going from memory, is the unit runner or the test runner file that comes included with Phantom.js. And then the second parameter is the HTML file that you want to run. And all I have to do is figure out in my CI how to make that call with, tell it what the exe is and then what the command line parameters are, set it up. And then the last piece of the puzzle that you have to figure out is, in your HTML file, usually you have to include another file that will listen to all the events from the unit testing framework. So in QUnit, QUnit comes with this file. With Jasmine, I had to look it up online. And anyway, what it does is it listens to all the events and then it can output to the console using just console.log typically a message formatted specific to your CI. So that and then Phantom.js's output goes to the CI is reading all the console output from Phantom.js. And it sees those messages in those certain formats, and that tells your CI system whether or not the tests passed, how many of them there were, and then your CI system can include it in, the other test runners that you might have. So if you have server-side test runners for if you're using JUnit for Java, it'll merge the two together and just give you one big report and say, say you had 1,000 Java tests and you had 100 JavaScript tests. It'll tell you had 1,100 tests and they all passed, or some of these ones failed. And it is a little bit of a work on the front end. A lot of it's just finding people that have set up example files and getting their files and putting them in the right place. So with QUnit, with Jasmine, because they're so popular, it's very easy to go out and find those files that'll get the output correct.
And which CI are you using?
So I've always used TeamCity, but it's a great product. I know that it's the process is identical in Jenkins.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to say you can execute from the command line on Jenkins too.
Yeah, I can't imagine there's a CI system out there that doesn't support that model. So many unit test runners don't already have runners that are integrated within the CI system. TeamCity does have test runners specific to .NET, and I think it has JUnit and things like that. So it doesn't need command line versions of those, but they all support them as far as I know. Any CI system worth its salt would.
Right.
Yep, that's pretty much the typical workflow if you want to use Phantom.js on any CI system.
Yeah. It's one of those things you only do when you set up your CI. So the next time you go and you set up your CI, you're like, oh, okay, where did I find this file and how did I get it and stuff. Right. It would be, I think one nice thing would be is if there was an easy place, like somebody set up a website that, tried to collect the files that are necessary and keep them up to date, because if you happen to have an older version of Phantom,
right,
and then you gotta marry the version of QUnit that you're using and grab the files out of there, and that would be nice if somebody put that information together. I kind of feel a little bit like a detective got to get online and go find the right QUnit file that adjusts the output. So. But once you find those three things and put them together, it just all works, and it's great.
Sounds like a perfect idea for a boilerplate project, right?
Absolutely.
Like Phantom, Jasmine, TeamCity, boilerplate.
Exactly.
And for client side, not from CI, at least there's already, for example, Grunt and Yeoman that will have support for Phantom.js, so you don't need to do extra stuff, which is nice.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, if we don't have anything else to talk about, let's go ahead and do the picks. Did we warn you about picks, Ariya?
Yes, I read your emails.
Oh, good. Yeah, I used to forget, and so now I always ask the guests, did I tell you about picks? Yeah, they're like, oh, well, I'll come up with something real fast. All right, cool. AJ, why don't you start us off?
All
So my pick is people that take learning into their own hands. I think I already picked that once. But there's this guy, I think he's a BYU student, not sure. He sent us his resume once, and so I've got this thing to post in the show notes. His name is Sterling DeMille, and he created a thumbnail viewer with Phantom.js. And I thought that was way cool. And I just love it when people have little projects that they do and they show off to the world how cool they are. And another pick, I've picked this before too, but I'm going to pick it again, which is the Transistor down in just south of Center Street in Provo. They're actually doing a class on Node.js this Saturday, and there's a bunch of cool guys down there. They're mostly hardware guys. But so they work with like Arduino and Raspberry Pi and that kind of building stuff.
Yeah, they're kind of a co-working space for that kind of thing.
Yeah, that too, because it's like $40 a month, and you can stay there all day if you want. I think most of the guys have normal day jobs, but then in the evenings they come and work on their projects and hack together.
Yep. Cool. Joe, what are your picks?
So my first pick is not available for most people until tomorrow, and that would be the new movie Total Recall coming out. I'm super excited for that one.
Joe, I hate to break it to you, but that movie was released in the 80s.
Really? Oh my gosh. I've been missing it all this time.
They're scamming you, man.
See you at the party, Richter. Do you recognize that?
I haven't actually seen it.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, that's a classic Arnold Schwarzenegger line. All right. So that's my first pick is Total Recall. My second pick is a classic old ancient book called Test-Driven Development by Example by Kent Beck. Really the original Bible on doing test-driven development. And if you haven't gotten that book and read through it, it's fantastic. My one complaint is he makes some kind of funny justifications for cleaning up code by calling them duplicated that I didn't necessarily agree with. I would have, if I were to rewrite the book, I would just say, I'm cleaning up code to make it better, not to remove, just remove duplication. But it is an amazing book and a great way to learn test-driven development. If you are interested in test-driven development, it's a great book.
All right, cool. Tim, have we heard your picks?
So I've been really having fun with the Smith library at work, so I'm going to pick that. It's an RPC system that I built for internal use, but it turns out to be generally very useful. And I'm going to add Travis and Phantom unit tests to it if possible. I just need to make sure that the HTML engine in Phantom is new enough.
Right.
But I've really enjoyed using the library, and I think it's fun.
Okay, cool. So I should have some picks. I spent the last couple of days working on some releases for some clients. And by releases, I mean betas. And kind of wound up rushing to get stuff done. So I'm trying to remember what all I've worked with so that I can pick it. I mean, one pick, and we've talked about it before, and it's just something that I've really found handy for a lot of things, especially in the case where I'm doing a lot of like evented stuff that I want in my web page, where I want it to do some Ajax work or do some updating based on some data that I have stored somewhere. I use Backbone.js, and it has made my life immensely easier than just going with the vanilla jQuery stuff. So really, really enjoy that. I don't really think I have any other picks at this moment. So, Ariya, what are your picks?
My first is Mockingjay. I tried to finish the entire Hunter Games books, and it's been fantastic so far. I like reading books. And the second one is the programming environment from Google. It's called Dart. I'm sure everyone heard about it. I think it's a fantastic language, and I think in many cases Google got it right with respect to the DX, something developer experience. So a lot of people talk about UX, but we need to emphasize more about DX. The entire SDK, the editor, it has all the fancy autocomplete and integrated docs and so on. It's just fantastic. It's very nice to work with.
Okay.
All right. Those are my picks.
Chuck, since you only took one pick, can I have your second pick?
Go ahead.
I also want to pick the Olympics.
Ooh.
Very
yeah.
topical.
I was sitting down at lunch the other day, and they had fencing on. Oh, man. It was so boring. But I've really been enjoying the swimming and stuff. So.
I thought the table tennis is surprisingly interesting, as is the badminton.
Oh, really?
Yeah, those are surprisingly interesting. But by far the best part of the Olympics, at least for me, is watching the U.S. Women's soccer team just kick everybody else's butt. And I heard somewhere that, if the U.S. ever wanted to get back at all those countries that really hate us, what we should do is get really good at soccer and beat them at the only thing they care about. And our women are doing just exactly that. So
nice. All right. Well, we'll get links to all of the picks that we had in the show notes. Looks like Tim has one more question. We'll let him ask it on the air, and then we'll wrap up.
Hey, Tim?
Okay, I'll ask it for him. He just typed it in the chat. He says, does Phantom support data view and WebSockets with array buffer messages?
Oh, so WebSockets is yes. I don't know about data view or array buffer. Seems that that's too bleeding edge for Phantom Jas right now. So you might want to wait like a couple of months.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. I just want to remind everybody that you can go and check out Jameson's, what is it? It's a group reading the papers on programming, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. And I also want to just thank Ariya for coming onto the show again, or coming onto the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm definitely going to have to dig into Phantom and figure out how to get it into my CI setup for my clients.
If you have any feedback on how to improve Phantoms so it gets better, then let me know.
All right. Well, we'll wrap the show. We'll catch y'all next week.
Thank you.